Hello and welcome to Law Matters. Our guest today at Mainline Public Television in Radnor Studio 21 is esteemed Philadelphia lawyer Marty Rubenstein. I invited Marty to come onto the show because I've seen some commercials on television which prompted me to develop a show discussing how to choose a lawyer for your situation. So Marty,
good morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming to Radnor Studio 21. I identified you as an esteemed lawyer, so what is your practice of law?
Okay. So John, first, thank you for inviting me to speak with this. I appreciate it. We had discussed it even before I arrived today, and you know that I'm looking forward to this. So I'm born and raised in the Philadelphia area. Went to Upper Dublin High School, graduated in the mid-'70s, went to college at Dickinson in Central PA, and then I came to Villanova Law School, graduated there. Met my wife, and I've raised my family in Lower Merion. I've been in practice for over 35 years. My practice has always been representing people who've been injured by something, whether it's as basic as a car accident, whether it's walking in an area that they felt was safe, but it wasn't. And then for the past 20 years, I've spent much more of my time representing people from locally as well as from different parts of the country who've been injured by recalled or unsafe medications or medical devices. And even more recently, we've represented a number of the players, retired players, in the NFL concussion settlement. That's been my practice.
As I said earlier in my introduction, is what prompted me to invite you on today is because one day I was flipping through the television channel and I'm seeing who's represented. Call us. I fight the insurance companies. I will get you the settlement you deserve. I. What do you say to that?
Well, you have to look backwards a little bit first. So 35 years ago, lawyers really weren't permitted to advertise to prospective clients in that fashion. Since that time, though, there's been a lot of some legislation and also guidance from the courts as to what is permissible speech and then what is impermissible. Some of the ads you're referring to are actually quite successful with persuading potential clients to come to your office. Now, whether I would believe that that's the kind of information that a client should rely upon in selecting a lawyer is a different issue. I don't believe that's the way to determine who might be able to best help you. There are ways to get that information, but it wouldn't simply be on that content. I look at those words more as an invitation to speak to someone, but not a basis for making a decision who to select.
Well, what causes me some concern when I watch those, and I don't know why I should be concerned, but what causes me concern is that the listener almost gets an assurance that you're going to get the settlement you deserve. You don't know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you don't know what you're going to get until you sit eye to eye with the attorney and he or she tells you, you know, not much going here.
Well, you can't make an assessment trying to protect yourself, particularly if you've been injured and it's something that's had a disabling effect upon you, where you required a lot of care. You cannot make a decision about who is best to protect you simply based upon a comment in a television ad. I mean, nobody should be thinking that way, in my opinion. However, as you stated, I totally agree with you. It's important to meet with a lawyer who you're interested in. First, do some investigation to assure yourself that there's the experience. This is a person, this is a law firm who handles this type of work. In our practice, 90+% of the people who I represent are referred to me by other lawyers or former clients. So that's a very good source. These are people who know what we do and they know what we don't do. When we meet with these people, what's most important? We want to right off the bat establish a comfort level. The client has to be of the belief that they can trust us. They have to believe that we know what we're doing. And they have to believe that we're going to put the time into representing them. There are some phenomenal lawyers in our area. Our region is, I'll say, loaded with tremendous legal talent. Philadelphia, Delaware County, Montgomery County. And I'm talking, I do litigation on both sides, the plaintiff and the defense side, fabulous lawyers and fabulous judges. So I'm a cheerleader for that. And in addition, in the non-litigation, and this, very, very intelligent and skilled non-litigation, people. But the client coming in for representation right off the bat has to believe the people know what they're doing, they've done it, they're trustworthy, and they will pay attention to my case. It's not important that they've done it for 50 other people if they're not going to do it for me.
And I think you probably said what I'm thinking, because a lot of the tone that I hear is aggressive, and I could tell from my relationship with you that you have a very good bedside manner, and that has to be critical with a lawyer and a client relationship. Is that true?
Well, I think it's very important. Some people, whether it's lawyers or in other areas, I think that their perspective is to try to impress the person they're speaking with how intelligent they are. And I think that's the exact opposite. I think what's most important when somebody comes to you for help is making sure that you know that the person who's coming to you is understanding what you're telling them. Clear. It's not about me trying to impress somebody with how many syllables I can throw in as many words as possible in a particular sentence. It's me making sure you came to me with an issue. You have to know that I'm being, again, honest with you, and I have to know that you understand it. And we're going to speak like we are right now and like we have before, and you're going to either feel comfortable that you want to move forward with me. It's a partnership. And law relationships, particularly with what we do in litigation, they're unique. I represent people for years. Sometimes it takes that long to get a resolution. So we have a relationship. I may get many calls. And along that way, we get to know each other quite well. Ultimately, we're going to hopefully reach a point in the case where either we're going to be considering an appropriate settlement offer, or we're going to be preparing to go to trial. But the client has to have the confidence in the person speaking to the client, so that when those big decisions have to be made, there's no worry that they don't trust that advice.
Well, that brings me to the point that I wanted to ask you next was, how do you know when a situation has gone too far and that you need a lawyer?
I don't think that you need to run to a lawyer for every single issue that comes up in your life. But most of us get a sense when something could involve something legal. And my real belief is that the person immediately seek at least initial legal advice. The advice may be, you don't need a lawyer. I'll give you an example. You call me up and you say, you know what, I was just driving in, I'll pick some township, not Radnor, somewhere else, and I was going 10 miles over the speed limit. I got a citation for speeding. I don't mind paying the fine, but I already have points on my license and I'm concerned about that. Do I need an attorney to join me at the hearing before the district justice? Some of these situations, you can receive advice before you get there as to how to handle it once you arrive there. And you don't necessarily need a lawyer. You may make a decision after you hear the advice that you want to bring a lawyer. And sometimes it comes down to issues of what's at stake and what's it going to cost, because it has to be affordable for you as well.
Are there any general practitioners anymore?
There are many general practitioners. Keep in mind, we're in a very urban area. And Philadelphia, the surrounding counties, is the southeastern region is large. But most of the state are smaller counties, smaller townships, and there may be there could be 19 lawyers in one particular location. Well, by necessity, they have to do more. The fact that someone's a general practitioner doesn't mean that that lawyer handles everything that comes to him or her. They receive the client, they hear the situation, and if the lawyer feels they're comfortable handling it, they'll do it. But if they feel that client's interest would be best served consulting with another lawyer who specializes in that matter, that's what they're going to suggest.
How do you know what kind of specialist you need?
I think the way it really works is you have something that's a problem. And it's helpful to people if they have a lawyer they're either friendly with or that they trust, just as a starting point, who they can share the story with. So if I have a problem with my car, I hear a rattle. When I take it to the car repair place, I don't tell the car repair person what's the diagnosis and what the solution is. I tell that person, here's the problem. Here's what's bothering me. I hear this noise. I think something's wrong. I don't know what it is. So similarly, when somebody comes to an attorney to say, here's what I'm concerned about, the lawyer will say, you know what? You need a real estate zoning specialist, or you need a real estate transactional lawyer, or I think you ought to talk to a criminal defense lawyer. Whatever it is, all you can tell the lawyer is what's troubling you, but you can't necessarily tell the lawyer what you need. That's the lawyer's job.
Can you ever represent yourself?
Yes, you can represent yourself. You can represent yourself civilly, you can represent yourself criminally. Do I recommend it? No. And depending upon the area that we're getting into would tell me which direction to go as far as the answer. But when we were speaking about this before, you used an old adage, the lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. When someone represents themselves, particularly someone who's not a lawyer, that is absolute danger. You don't know where to go. You probably don't know much about the consequences of what you're even saying. And my experience is that people who have some knowledge are actually more dangerous to themselves than people who have no knowledge. People with no knowledge will try to get to a lawyer right off the bat. People with some knowledge will try to handle it, some will try to handle it themselves first. And they may put themselves in a very precarious situation before they get to a lawyer. Now the lawyer has to try to undo, some of the harm that's already been caused. So I strongly recommend, if you sense that you have a legal issue, at least try to get an initial consult with a lawyer, or if you have a friend you can preliminarily call for advice or referral, that's your much better bet.
Along the lines, this thought had just occurred to me, along the lines of the television ads is probably the one that I remember the most, LegalZoom. What do you think of LegalZoom and other legal help from the internet?
So LegalZoom is basically an online type process where someone wants to set up a small corporation, or somebody wants to do a will or something like that transactionally. They go online, they fill in some online questionnaire, and there's a series of prompts, and eventually you'll be directed to some form with language. You can just fill in your name, and you can fill in whatever information is requested. The form that you complete may be entirely appropriate, may be perfect. The problem is this. When someone is going into any kind of a legal endeavor, whether it's starting a small corporation or doing a will, 90% of it may be done properly. The problem is the 10%. So when people rely upon online knowledge to guide them, they're losing out on the interaction they would have with a law firm. So I have no experience with LawZoom or any of the other online services, so I'm not being critical of them. It's just, I believe a client is best served, at least initially, with a consult with a law firm. The lawyer may say to the potential client, listen, we handle this. It's a lot in your interest for me to have one of my paralegals walk you through this. It'll be a lot cheaper. I will oversee it, but it'll be done the right way. An example of the harm in not doing it that way, we had someone who had done a will.
They wrote their own will?
They wrote their own will.
What, on a napkin or?
No, they typed it up, and then they came to another law firm and they changed the will. The problem was that even though the will was done properly, it was witnessed, it was clear, they didn't appreciate the fact that in Pennsylvania, you need to turn in the original will. So they only had kept copies.
Who do you bring the original
Well, when you
to?
go to the county, whether it's a surrogate's office or orphan's court, there's a special estate branch in Montgomery County, Delaware County, Chester, Bucks, and Philly. And the original is generally required. So the person who passed away had a specific intent as to what he or she wanted to see done. And simply because the original wasn't kept, because the person didn't realize that was frustrated. So you want to see whatever it is you want to have done, setting up a corporation, some real estate transaction, estate planning. You want to make sure whatever you want to do, it gets done properly. I mean, the worst thing in life is there's two things in life I think that are bad. One is grossly overspending for something, but what's worse is underspending and then not getting anything that you wanted.
And you know, on a side note, I had an Aunt Ida who wrote a will on a legal pad, and you know, things were crossed out, and it was the only will they could find. And you can imagine what controversy and turmoil that caused in my mother's family.
I have no doubt.
How do you untangle that?
Well, some things are very difficult to untangle. Sometimes the harm is such that it can't be untangled. You're not going to be able to get it to where the person wanted it, and you're going to end up with having to settle and try to negotiate it based upon competing evidence. Mm-hmm. So, again, if you start out with legal advice, you're going to be on the right path. I wouldn't underestimate the importance of speaking to somebody and telling them your story. They may hear something that you didn't even think was important. And that's what you lose when you go online. I know today's generation, they live online. But it does not eliminate the benefit, and I think the necessity of actually speaking to somebody who knows that area.
Do you know, this just popped into my head as a thought. Do you know if LegalZoom has ever been sued?
The answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know.
Yeah. So as I told you earlier, what the old rabbi told me, what you get cheap, you pay for in aggravation. And I think that's what LegalZoom kind of like reminds me of. So someone can write their own will, and you
Yes.
did explain that.
Oh, yeah.
And then, can someone write their own will, then take it to an attorney, and then he would clean it up?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, keep in mind, you could, let's say I was an estate lawyer, which I'm not, but you came to me and you typed up what you want to have done. I would take it. I'd use most of your content. I'd make sure that the proper language was utilized. I'd make sure you would come in. I'd make sure it was properly witnessed. I'd make sure that the original will was secured in a safety deposit box. Make sure you have a copy with proper instructions. So we'd make sure, from the beginning to the end, that everything is done properly, so that when the time comes where the will needs to be looked at and then administered, everything's been done the right way. And I recommend that people go to estate lawyers. This is what they do. This is what they're set up to do.
So the same thing applies to a corporation?
Yes, same thing.
Person can write up their own corporation?
Well, a person can write up an agreement to form a corporation. A person does not need a lawyer to incorporate their new corporation under Pennsylvania law. You can go online and do it, register with the state. Making sure that what you want to accomplish is being accomplished, the odds are it's much more likely if you go to a lawyer who actually does that. And I think when you speak to a lawyer, a lot of this comes down to affordability. And the one context where it frequently comes up is divorce. So if somebody has financially a lot at stake, or if there's a marriage with children and there's custody issues, that's a very significant life-altering situation. It can also be an incredibly expensive situation. So somebody will say, well, who's the best divorce lawyer in Montgomery County? I can give several names, but they're also the most expensive. Now, if somebody says to me, well, they don't have that kind of money, could you suggest somebody else? Well, I'm able to suggest other fine attorneys who are more affordable. And that's important, but you still need to direct the person to somebody who's an expert in that area. And you don't want to have that person try to handle it on their own.
It sounds as though people invariably come to you with different situations, because you're explaining them very clearly to our viewing audience. Do you, obviously, it sounds like you make referrals all the time.
As I've gotten older, I get as many calls with situations I don't handle as I do from other lawyers with situations I do handle. I think where we get in trouble in life is when we try to handle something that it's really not our area. Do what you do best, you'll do it better, client will have a better result, happier client, and get those people who what they want isn't what you know, isn't what you regularly do. You don't want to do something for the first time with a client who's coming to you. It's a mistake.
Just judging by the tone in your voice and the way you've explained it, it sounds like you put the client first, and I'm not sure all attorneys do that, I'm sorry to say. I think sometimes attorneys don't always. That's just my opinion. I'm sorry. Don't hold it against me.
I won't hold it against you. I'm going to say this, though. I was very fortunate as a young lawyer, exposed to leaders in Philadelphia and in the suburbs. Sometimes they were my opponents, just fine people who I had tremendous respect for. And I always really, in my mind, aspired to try to be like them, where someday maybe I'd be looked at and respected like that. So I've had a very good experience. I'd say 95% of the attorneys I've worked with or against, and in my mind, working against them, there's still cooperation and collaboration to ultimately get the case resolved, are people who aren't the way you just described it. There's always a small percentage who are, but that's, I think, the minority.
If I were to bet, you probably have a very good working relationship with other attorneys, because you're not like that screaming guy that I saw on television. I'm sorry.
I'm not a screamer. I've never been a good screamer. It's not my style. And I think that, look, there's certain cases where it's clear from the get-go, this isn't going to be an easy case to resolve. The other side and my client are opposed, and I don't know how we're eventually going to find a resolution somewhere. But if in a case every day and every issue and every phone call is a battle, it's going to be brutal. It's going to wear down the litigants. It's going to wear down the attorneys. It's going to really anger the judge. And whenever I go into a courtroom and a judge senses that the lawyers are at war with each other, that judge, he or she, will find a way to punish both lawyers, to force them to get real and get reasonable. And then, look, more important in my experience in life, if the other lawyer and I establish a good relationship, it will inure to both our clients' benefits. And that's, I always look for a way to establish some medium where we trust each other. And we know what we can trust each other with, and we know how far we can go with that and how far we can't go. And it's honesty, and it's not trying to impress the other person by posturing or threatening. And my personal experience, this is my style. Not every lawyer does it this way, but I think a lot do. Better results for everybody, including the system.
I'm running out of time, but I want to ask you, would you come back again?
Absolutely.
I want to ask you one last question.
Sure.
How do you feel when you lose?
Horrible. I feel horrible if I gave the client advice and something influenced my advice other than what was in the client's best interest. So when I was a very young lawyer, one of my first trials was a case in which there was no offer. I had clients unrealistic in my mind. And through the trial, we actually did pretty well. And we got the case to a point where there was a very reasonable offer on the table. And I strongly recommended it. But I didn't break my client's arm to take it. I didn't want them to feel I was afraid to have the jury make the decision, although I believed that they should take the offer. And I gave them time to think about it. I didn't want to pressure them excessively, but it was during a trial. Turned out they did reject the offer, and as I feared and suspected, it was a defense verdict. I had asked them to bring in other family members before rejecting the offer, and I was refused. They didn't want to bring in other family members to discuss it. Naturally, 3 days later, I do get a call from another family member asking about the offer and the trial. Even though I had recommended it, I'd done everything in my power, I felt like I could have done more. So that particular one was the first one I thought of when you asked that question.
Until next time, with Marty Rubenstein, this is John Ricciutti, Mainline Public Television, Radnor Studio 21. Please look forward to it. Marty will be back because I have more questions. Thank you.
You are watching Radnor Studio 21, an arts, educational, and entertainment station proudly serving the Main Line and greater surrounding area.